Hey guys, welcome back to the channel Review Anything and Everything. And today we're getting to another, this figure is so big, another non unboxing review. I'm going to keep this figure inside the package for display purposes and collector purposes. But if there becomes a point where I do decide to take him out of the package, I will re-review him. I'm sorry for the whole lighting. Um, I'm going to see if this looks any better. No, it doesn't. All right, you guys. Hopefully it's a little bit better, but it's a little hard getting a good angle of this character because he's so big and the lighting is just a little all over the place, and I apologize for that. So this is the Apocalypse retro carded figure because when you have them in this packaging, they call it retro card to be its kind of resemblance of the old, I think it was Toy Biz, if I'm not mistaken, but correct me in the comments, but the old line of X-Men figures that used to come out with when the original X-Men series had came out. Ancient Evil, Marvel's Apocalypse. Now, this is considered a deluxe figure. Now, apparently, for the Spider-Man wave, which they also have a Spider-Man wave, which is similar to this in terms of the card backing type of setup with the clear plastic. And they had a deluxe figure for Rhino. So, the X-Men series has theirs, which is kind of retro. Spider-Man has their retro series, and they both have deluxe figures. So, the best of my knowledge, there is only just this deluxe figure and the Rhino deluxe figure. Now, once again, I'm sorry for the lighting, you guys. All right, I hope this works a little better for less glare for you guys to be able to see some of the things that come with it. But you have these two sets of fisted hands. Obviously, I mean, this pair of fisted hands. You have his regular pair of open hands. You have his other face here, which I think looks really nice, and his main face he has on with a kind of like a showing his teeth, a gritting face, which I think both of them actually look really nice. He's got a cannon hand back there with blast effects, two of them, and then a bigger blast effect right there, and then the tubes that would go on him. In addition, on the back of the package, you see his character here, and it just gives a little bit of information for the character. Look upon the future and tremble. He is Apocalypse, the world's most powerful mutant, and from the ashes of our world, he will build a better one. So, one of his kind of lines that he always would generally say, stuff similar to that. Now, I've heard some people mention about when it comes to this figure about how, it, some people say it doesn't have that much detail on it. And I get it because the colors feel very basic and simple and plain and don't really give for a lot of detail. And some people say, well, the face looks very more realistic, while the body looks more like the cartoon base. I actually find this to be a plus because I feel like this character can either go in a more animated collection setup or he can go in a regular, um, comic collection setup, and I feel like he could play on both sides of it. He may not be the most comic based version accuracy, but then he also may not be the most animated version best accuracy. But the fact that he could play on both lines makes it to me feel pretty good because he can go in either collection, and so I look at it more as a positive. He is actually a very big character. Just gonna measure him out a little bit. So he is just below 8 inches, which I think is a decent size. Now, I just reviewed the Gray Hulk from the 2-pack with Bruce Banner, and he was about 8.5 inches tall. So I think that the sizing of both of these characters works well, even though technically Apocalypse's height in Marvel, his base height, not obviously he can grow to any size he wants to be, is 7 feet tall, which is the same size as the Green Hulk. So technically, the Gray Hulk should be smaller. But as I mentioned in that video, the Gray Hulk is depicting the size, the same sculpt as the Green Hulk. So in that case, you could say he's standing at the same height as the Green Hulk will be, which is obviously not 7 feet, but within ratio to each other. Um, you know, Apocalypse would be one of the big boys, and he is in this case. I think that the figure actually looks really nice. And at the time when I purchased this figure, which was not that long ago, he was about $35. He has gone up since. It fluctuates. Sometime it'll be 42. It'll go back to around 35. I think at 35, it's not a bad price. You're paying $10 over the price of a normal figure, but he is a deluxe figure. And he does come with a good amount of accessories. But with that being said, if it does creep up to like 40 or 42, do I think it's worth it? I still think it's not bad value as opposed to when a regular size character goes up to that price just because he's hard to get. I'm going to put the link in the description where you can purchase this on Amazon. I think it's definitely a really cool figure. To be honest with you, one thing I always thought was funny about the character Apocalypse was the fact that um, he would have all this kind of techno abilities and he would shape his arm into a gun shape, even though in theory, I think he could just project. I used to think he could just project blast from his hands, just like any kind of super based character would be able to do, like Silver Surfer, Doctor Strange, or something like that. Um, but in a later version of the animated series, the one I forget, I forget the exact name of this animated series, but it was the one that shortly came after the first X-Men movie, and it wasn't that long after that because I know they started basing some of the way the characters looked in it after the the movie. Like for example, Mystique. There was a point in this cartoon. There's the one where all of them were going to school. If you guys remember, you can put it down below. I forget what it was called. X Men. I don't know what it was called, but Evolution. I'm sorry, that's what it was. X Men Evolution. And in that, it was interesting because once the movie came out and they show how Mystique looked, they made an evolution episode where like she got evolved and her powers got heightened, and they made her look like the version in the movie. But anyway, uh, in that in that series, one thing I liked about it is it later brought Apocalypse into the mix, but not from the standpoint of in the old animated series he was powerful, but he was mysterious more in the aspect of you know he's hiding in the shadows. This one made him more mysterious in this X-Men Evolution made him more mysterious in the aspect of we don't know anything about him, how he really came to be, other than myth stories that would depict this powerful mutant, and everyone was scared of him. So it gave him this legendary sense. And when they depicted him, it was before he became in this form, so he had more of this kind of do anything kind of power set in that form. He was just more humanoid form without the techno aspect to him. And it was just simply he was flying around. So he had flight, he had energy powers, various energy manipulation abilities. He essentially could do anything he wanted, is the way they depicted him to be. And it's funny because once he became more techno evolved, it's almost like his powers became more limited to where it's like, okay, now if he's going to shoot an energy blast, he converts his hand into some kind of gun as opposed to just blasting out of his hand, which is what he was doing in that version. So what was interesting to me is that version depicted him, even though that was before he was transformed, depicted him in the way I always thought he could be, which was flying around, shooting straight from his hands without having to turn his hands into guns. So I never really understood why that he would do that. I don't know if it made his attack stronger or whatever the case is. It definitely seemed like it would have been inconvenient, but everything became about making him like that, unless his design of his characters when they made him was just more like that. And later on, he got more of an origin story that obviously went against his original design. And for that reason, they want to keep to showing him with his original design. And in that case, I get it. Um, Meaning that if they made him this kind of techno organic mutant who's half mechanical machine, half mutant. And when they first came up with him, and he's able to alter his size, alter his hands, and this and that, and make weapons out of his hands. And then later on, they said, you know what? Like now we're gonna go give him an origin story, and but we still want him to be that same version we came up with whenever we created him. Then I understand that, but yeah, that was always like a mystery to me. But Apocalypse has always been the big bad for the X-Men. Overthrowing Magneto. He kind of was almost like if Magneto was like Bison in Street Fighter, um, Apocalypse was like Akuma. He was like the guy who just came out of nowhere, was more powerful, more dominant. Everyone feared him. He was the top of the food chain in terms of X-Men's villains. And for a long time, that was the case. When X-Men in the 90s was always like the X-Men was always depicted as being very weak, characters for the most part, weaker than the Avengers, weaker than most of the other superhero teams, and their struggles were a lot more harder. So Apocalypse was considered like the greatest thing that they could ever fight, which he himself probably would have been on par with some of the regular superhero characters that were on the Avengers. Now, in the future, fast forward, you have all this stuff with different power creep and different things and whatnot, and now mutants are more powerful than anything else ever. And so it's just definitely a different feeling nowadays than it when it was in the '90s when, like I said, X-Men characters were considered very weak. People like Apocalypse was the top of their food chain, unstoppable, which is why you have depictions of him ruling the future. So you have some depictions of the Sentinels ruling the future. Then you have depictions of where Apocalypse ruled the future because that's how powerful he was back then, especially in relation to the X-Men. And keep in mind, too, back in the days, more so than now, X-Men was almost its own contained sub-universe in the Marvel Universe. So whenever you had, just like you had in the X-Men animated cartoon, in any X-Men events, all the X-Men events were always just unto themselves. Like you didn't have it expand to all the other superhero people of the world unless they had to. But even during the Dark Phoenix saga, there were other superheroes that knew of what was going on, but they had no partaking in it. So X-Men was always its own subcategory, which was funny. It had enough characters to populate its own complete continuum, just like it was its own separate Marvel company, like a separate Marvel 2.0 company. It was that big. Um, Especially when you actually had Marvel cards that were just for the X-Men series and had so many cards that it was really like a full set of a card deck for just X-Men alone. Even then, you still had more room for other characters that they probably didn't put into those sets. But my point that I'm getting at is that of all of that and of all that sub universe of X-Men stuff, that even though it existed on the same Earth as all the rest of the superheroes, but still managed to stay separate, Apocalypse was the big bad threat of all that. He was always the number one threat. There was no one who surpassed him, even to the point where the entire arc um of Jean Grey, Cyclops, Sinister, getting a hold of his kids, going to the future, Cable, all this stuff was all intertwined with Apocalypse for Apocalypse to have a new body to put his conscious into that was going to be super powerful, which went into the whole Cable saga and how Cable was created and all that other kind of stuff with Strife and all that other kind of stuff. All this stuff revolves around Apocalypse. All that deep storytelling revolves around this great being Apocalypse. Then when they added the background to him in X-Men Evolution, which he probably had it already in the comics, but for a lot of people who were just seeing it there for the first time, you added this aspect that, he came from those times as a mutant before he had this techno upgrade. And what was crazy is I don't think a lot of people realize how deep the character of Apocalypse goes and how many other characters that he touches. So essentially, um, when he was young and he was in like a tribe and he was fighting in ancient Egypt against another tribe, and there was this ruler, King Tut or whatever the case is, who tried to stop him because he knew he was so powerful and wanted to stop you know his ascension, Apocalypse's ascension down the line. How did he even know that that would be the case with Apocalypse? Was because that character was actually a version of Kang in the past, trying to stop Apocalypse from even becoming what he was. But Apocalypse defeated him, took his time traveling technology, and then used it along with the celestial technology, because I think they were one and the same at the time. That's how Kang was time traveling or whatnot. I may not have all the pieces of the story, but you can look that up. And essentially, Apocalypse got that techno enhancement, evolution technology, celestial technology, whatever kind of technology it was, time traveling technology also from Kang, who was going back in time to stop him because he was so powerful that he knew Apocalypse was going to rule the future. So here you have a character who not only was the X-Men's greatest villain and most powerful villain at the time, you had a character whose past stems like 5,000 years back into the past, where one of the Avengers' greatest villains actually went to try to stop him and couldn't. And that ended up making him even more powerful. You also have the connection with Cable, like I mentioned before. You also have his own future timeline, Age of Apocalypse, which goes into the fact of him actually ruling, and that was a future that you could say Kang was trying to prevent.
where he dominates and rules the world. So this character has so much weight behind him when it comes to, you know, his importance and his dominance in the X-Men lore. So he's definitely one of those characters that, like I said, you definitely want to pick up. You definitely want to grab him, especially once you understand all that and the weight of all that. He always, at least in the 90s, was the X-Men's most powerful villain. Nowadays, storylines have changed. They kind of diminished how important he is or how powerful he is. And you have storylines now where him and the X-Men are all united, and it's different, and power creep and different characters seem to be on equal standing with him. But back then, nobody in the X-Men lore was touching him. They weren't coming close. Aside from Dark Phoenix, there really wasn't anybody really on that level in the X-Men continuum who was really like one of their enemies, one of the X-Men's enemies that was really on his level to be fighting him. Maybe you could say Gladiator too, but they never came to blows, even though people wanted to see it. They had a glimpse of that in the X-Men animated series where they thought that was going to happen for a brief moment, and it didn't happen. And everyone kind of wanted to know what was going to happen there. But yeah, sorry for the rambling on, but I just like giving a bit of information to the characters so you understand what I like about them and what might enhance your likability of the characters in terms of if you decide to purchase them. Like always, you guys like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys next video.